Thank you so much for tuning into this video, Leader Tips by E. Once again, thank you so much for tuning in to this video, which is episode 3. And this episode, we're going to talk about something that we as African Americans have normalized. And I don't want to reveal exactly what the title is. I just want you to flow and go with me as we go throughout this piece. Before I do that, I do want to set a couple of disclaimers. This is not the Bible. Take what works for you and leave behind what does not, because there is no one person that can paint the full experience that people of color, particularly women of color, have in the workplace. And so again, this is only Ebony's experience. And of course, I will always wrap in personal and professional experiences to cement the learning and to help you all see how certain things come to life. The other thing is that I want to make sure that it's very clear. I don't believe that you can be inclusive yet exclusive at the same time. Even though my videos were talking a lot about the Black experience in corporate spaces, because I am an African-American woman, I do work in corporate spaces. I also want us to know that these videos are also packed with a lot of great knowledge that will help people who are not of color, who really do want to drive equity and inclusion in the workplace. I highly encourage you to tune in. So just because the title might state something that you might feel is not relevant or applicable for you, I highly encourage you, if you're an ally or if you are just a person who really want to drive inclusivity, to please tune in. Let's go ahead and dive right in. I am curious on how often have you all changed your lexicon or your vocabulary when you're talking to people in the workplace versus when you're talking at home with your friends. I'm just curious if anyone has ever switched up maybe their vocabulary, the words they say, the way they say things, their tonality. Just curious. How often do you change how you even greet people based on their race or ethnicity? Why do you think you do that? And are you even aware that you do it? And the reason I ask if you're aware is because a lot of times we normalize this behavior. We normalize code switching. And as a matter of fact, when I think back to when I was younger, I was always told, you got to know how to turn it on and off. And Ebony, you really do good at turning it on and off. Well, I'm sure a lot of us have heard that we can turn things on and off. In reality, what it is that it allows us to switch codes, to code switch. And I'm sure you're probably wondering, well, why do we do that? And what is code switching? Code switching really is a way that we shift our behavior, maybe our vocabulary, the words we say, the things we do, so that we can really fit into the dominant workplace culture. Another way that it shows up is if we almost drown out some of our identity just to make sure that we show up as approachable, that we show up as likable, that we show up as well-versed and grounded in various cultures. And so that is all a part of code switching. The challenge with that, us as African Americans or people of color, we've become so accustomed to it to where we've normalized it and we're numb to it. And there are some negative impacts to us psychologically when we have to continue to code switch. And the purpose of this video is that we're going to talk about those things. I did think about this one example because I travel a lot, and I would notice that sometimes, like when I would do my ride share, whether that was Uber or Lyft, I would notice that when I would get in the car, they would change the radio station, put it on something, maybe R&B or hip hop. And that is another example of people just automatically having biases that they just believe that you like a certain music. And so all of what we're talking about is steeped in biases and assumptions. And we're going to dive a little bit more into this piece around code switching. A couple of things I just wanted to add in is that us as African Americans, we have made it comfortable to code switch. And the reason we do it is because we've also been taught that this is the way to be professional. Believe it or not, studies have shown that oftentimes in white spaces, they even encourage us to code switch. Unintentionally, though, because I'm not going to say it's intentionally, it's just that the way we are naturally, how we are with our friends, does not align with professionalism. And so it is truly reinforced through colleagues at work, as well as our grandparents, our grandmom, our granddad, our mom, our sister. They reinforce that as well. And again, it's all for or with the attempt to make sure that we are perceived as professional. Let's talk a little bit about how it shows up in the workplace. So you all know, and I've told you that I speak and teach a lot. And this is probably about 8 years ago, not so much now because I'm so okay with being my true, authentic, and raw self. And before that, whenever I would hear that I needed to go and do a presentation, like a big meeting or something, instead of me being concerned about my content, I was concerned about my look. Now, people who are not of color, they typically are concerned about their content, and rightfully so. For me, no, it wasn't really a concern around that. It was more a concern on, what am I going to look like? Can I wear my braids? Should I wear my fro? Should I straighten my hair? How much do I have to smile? What should I put on? And so that is another way that code switching shows up in the workplace, when we decide to switch codes to assimilate to the dominant culture. And a lot of times we're doing that just to make ourselves look approachable. That's why we're told to smile, even though we don't feel like smiling. Even though we don't feel like smiling. And it's also a way to make people who are not of color feel comfortable with our existence in the workplace. Another way it shows up is people in a room intentionally and even unintentionally stay away from other people that look like them. Let me give you an example. So let's just say, for instance, you're at a conference and you know that it's not a lot of African Americans or people of color in the room. What I have seen and what I have done, so I will say that I'm also a victim of this. I really wanted to go up to the person that had the same skin tone as me just to connect, to say, oh my gosh, I see another person that looks like me. And I intentionally stayed away. And I intentionally stayed away because I didn't want to be perceived as totally united. And I didn't want to be perceived as I just want to hook up and connect with someone Black. So intentionally, I would stay away, even though on the inside, I was longing to build that connection and that friendship with that person. So that's another way that we code switch. And again, you probably have never done that before. And this is Ebony's experiences. Another experience is, I haven't met too many white Ebonies. You all can let me know when you meet one. Most of the time, my name, it says that I am a woman, and I'm also an African-American woman. And so whenever I'm like looking for new opportunities, I would go by my middle name. And my middle name is so nebulous. Like, you would never know if I was a woman or a man. You would never know what my ethnicity is by my middle name. And that's what I would go by on resumes. And even when talking with different individuals, even though I hated the name, I would go by that so that it would raise my chances of being seen or being heard. So that's just another example on how I have code switched in the workplace. So why do we do it? We've talked about this. We do it because we want to be perceived as professional. We also want to stay clear of, being around other people in the workplace that'll probably make us feel like we live in this box and we're not forward thinking, or we're not leaders, or we're not professionals. So a lot of times we code switch that way. Another reason we code switch is because we would rather focus on how we're similar versus focusing and being prideful of our unique differences. We would prefer to just focus on our similarities to connect with our white counterparts versus truly being okay with being our true, raw, authentic selves. And so that's another reason as to why we code switch in the workplace. And what does this do to us? It eventually starts to grow a level of hostility. And believe it or not, it's because when people are starting to be aware of what's going on and being able to link concepts to their experiences, then we start to see things differently. And it makes us doubt ourselves and also makes us doubt the people that we once thought we wanted to connect with. And so it really does cause us to not feel as confident to be who we truly are. We always focus on dismissing and debunking the racial stereotypes. And because we're always worried about that, we can't focus on the work, or it's our mental capacity and our innovation and our excitement and creativity is stifled because we are constantly trying to debunk stereotypes. Some ways that we do that. We all, and I know we've all heard this, we got to work 10 times harder than them. Well, working 10 times harder than them, we're doing that to debunk the assumption or the bias that we are lazy. What does that do? That causes burnout. We avoid discussing topics that we're interested in so we can make sure that we connect with other people who look differently from us. So we avoid doing that. And what happens is we start to be drained of all of our creativity and our excitement and our connection time. We always wear a smile, even when we don't want to wear a smile. I mean, I tell you, sometimes I would leave at the end of the day and I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm tired of smiling. Well, we do that. And oftentimes we do it because we don't want to be perceived as the angry Black person or the angry Black woman. We constantly water down our message. So we're always thinking about, okay, how am I going to say this? What am I going to say? And we do that, but guess what? It just strips us of our personality and our authenticity. It minimizes our ideas. It minimizes our voice. It minimizes our perspectives. It minimizes our experiences. And it minimizes our passion and zeal for certain topics that really, if it's leveraged correctly, could really bring great value to a team and an organization. And then it depletes our excitement around just performance altogether. And so guess what? We now are starting to silently quit, and we'll talk about silent quitting in another episode. What are some things that we can do as people of color in this instance? What I will share with you, and I've talked about this before, is we need to start showing up and being our authentic self. For the purpose of this video, that's really all I have to say, because I really want to give tips to leaders and organizations who serve as allies and or who truly have a desire to be an inclusive leader. Really, this one lands on them. It lands on your leadership team. So let's talk about this. What are some tips that we can give inclusive leaders and allies in the workplace? The first thing, I encourage you all to challenge yourself to examine the culture. Look at the culture and really determine, is it an inclusive culture? If you have focus groups and you only invite the same people every time, it might not be inclusive. If when you're opening up a meeting, you're only talking about sports, it might not be inclusive. If you're only celebrating certain instances or certain holidays and you're not celebrating all holidays, or a group of holidays that represents your workforce, it might not be inclusive. And so I truly encourage you to really step back and evaluate whether or not you really do have an inclusive culture. Identify underrepresentation at all levels in the organization, and not just levels in the organization, but levels of people in the room as well as at the table. Because I truly do believe that a lot of the great ideas and thoughts start in the boardroom. And if you notice that everyone looks like you might want to reevaluate that, or not might, you need to reevaluate that. There's no inclusivity there because you don't have a representation from each voice, a person that looks differently, feels differently, loves differently. You don't have that. And so how can you truly say you're an inclusive organization? And then focus on inclusion and belonging. I do want to talk about this for a moment. I work in the diversity, equity, and inclusion space, and I always share this. I don't focus on diversity. Diversity is the end result, and that will come. What we should focus on is inclusivity. Once we start to really live and breathe and show and demonstrate inclusion in the workplace, People of differences, all types of differences, will automatically come to the organization. So you don't have to focus as much on that. I highly encourage to, talk to your team and challenge them to think differently and really, really force them to really be able to step outside themselves to be inclusive. Focus on inclusion and belonging, and diversity will manifest. It will show up and it will come. Today, we have talked about three things. We've talked about what is code switching. We've talked about how it shows up in the workplace. What are the impacts of us code switching? And then what are some things our organizations can do to really help to drive inclusion and belonging in the workplace? I hope that you were able to walk away with at least 1 to 2 golden nuggets that'll help you to be effective and successful. And of course, always to promote equity and inclusion. Thank you so much. And I look forward to seeing you and hearing from you on the next video. Please remember, if you like this video, please do the thumbs up. Also, please remember to subscribe to the channel if you have not already. Leave a comment if you would like to share these videos at any time. I really appreciate you. Thank you so much. Have a great day. Goodbye.